Welcome to the Ag and Food Finance and Policy Division. We'll call the meeting to order. Just before we get started, a few introductions and other things that we'll have as well. We have a second page now, Lauren Dower. Is that correct? So Lauren is here with Dana. Welcome to the committee. And Lauren, where are you from?
From New Ulm.
From New Ulm. Okay. So nobody on our committee is directly from New Ulm, but I think many of us have probably been there at different points. So welcome. Happy to have you.
For 1 year, he's got two.
We do have a quorum. Let's do the minutes right off the bat, and then I'll introduce a couple of other people. But Representative Brand.
Madam Chair, I move the minutes from March 3rd, 2020.
I think it's Portman.
Members, that the minutes are in your package. Is there anyone who has additions or corrections? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? The motion prevails. The minutes are adopted. So just a couple of other things. Just, like to embarrass people here, but Grayson O'Driscoll, Representative O'Driscoll, serves with all of us. His nephew's in the audience today, so he's interested in hemp. So we're glad to have him. He's going to learn more about it. And if anybody, so Grayson is here, so welcome to the committee. Tom Smoody is here, and we welcome him. He's just in the back there. And if you know that name, he was the AURI 2018 Ag Innovator of the Year, and he makes great popcorn. And so today, I believe there's going to be some popcorn available for us. And I don't know if Tom wants to come down to say hello. You can certainly do that. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but we always love to. But since you're here, we're glad to see you. I know that I think you were in the Senate Ag Committee. So if you just want to go to the table and just state your name and just.
Hello, my name's Tom Smoody with Smoody Sunflower Oil. And we've been working with AURI over the last how many years to innovate different products, and most of it's out of desperation when you're a farmer. So, so the thing about this popcorn, I'll back up. In 2010, we were looking for a different crop to crush for the byproduct, actually, and to feed our feedlot for cattle for protein. Well, it turned into the oil was the thing that we're going after. So right now we have oil in retail in the small bottles in Cub and Coburn's and Cashwise and all over the 5-state region now. And I ran into we have two different businesses, one for selling grain bins and whatnot for farm equipment and the oil. I ran into a farmer over in Mora actually that builds a machine to build these bags for popcorn. And we tried for 2 years how to keep liquid oil in a popcorn bag without having wax in that bag. So we took all the fluorocarbons out of the bag. All that's in there is popcorn, our sunflower oil, which is liquid, and salt. So there's no additives, no preservatives in a brown paper bag. And it was very challenging to keep water in a bag, basically. But it's been done, and we're probably over 500 stores now. And it has a really good flavor. It's so white and crisp, and so you guys can try it out and see what you think. The last thing we've been trying now with this year, I've been working with another producer for Minnesota Hemp, and we've figured out how to clean up the oil on hemp and put that in a microwave bag also. And it doesn't turn green now. So before we could only sell it on March 15th or whatever for St. Patrick's Day, but so that's one of the things that we're working on right now. So you guys can enjoy it and go from there.
Well, thank you so much for coming to the committee and sharing your popcorn, and I can attest that it is very flavorful. I've had it numerous times, so thank you. Any questions for Mr. Smoody? Thank you, very much appreciate it. Members, last month we had a presentation by MDA on the industrial hemp program. You recall that. I know that some people had remaining questions, and there was a lot of interest in that. We had to kind of set some of those questioners aside to be able to complete the meeting. So we're going to have a little bit more of a discussion about that. But before we go into that, we've got Representative Vang has a hemp bill that the department is proposing, and she also will be aided by Whitney Place. So Assistant Commissioner Place will also come here, and then, and it is Hemp Day at the Capitol here, Hemp Day on the Hill. So just welcome to anyone who's here to learn more about hemp or is a hemp producer. So welcome to the committee. Representative Vang, you can go ahead and move your bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to move my bill, House File 3706, to be in front of the committee.
Okay, so to be recommended to be re-referred to the Judiciary, Finance, and Civil Law Division. Very, very good. So go ahead and
Yeah, thank
begin.
you. So before I start, I would like to give a quick shout out to my constituent. He is also in the room. It's great to see that since we legalized hemp in Minnesota, this spurred a lot of interest since then, and it's always been growing. And so I'm glad to see that there's a lot of it's growing in popularity. So my bill, House File 3706, is basically making some provisions, industrial hemp provisions modified, definitions provided, and industrial hemp data classified. Since the passage of the 2018 Farm Bill defined industrial hemp as an agricultural crop in the U.S., it opened interstate commerce for hemp products and allows states and tribal governments to oversee hemp regulations. And as MDA began developing their plan to submit to USDA and the rules for the state of Minnesota, some changes to the Industrial Hemp Development Act were identified. First, after operating a pilot program for the last 4 years, which licenses both growers and processors of hemp, it was identified that processing was not explicitly included in the statute. And so this bill adds definitions for applicant, authorized representative, entity, processing location, and processor. This bill also includes processing throughout the chapter where appropriate, including the rule-making authority. The need to include processing also came from the work on the sale of cannabinoid products, work group spearheaded by Representative Paul Anderson last session. Secondly, because the program has been operating under a pilot program for research purposes, licensee data was protected under the Minnesota data practices. So while Minnesota is operating under a pilot program for the 2020 growing season, once the pilot ends, all licensee data will become public. And so the goal of this bill is to protect growers and processing locations and street addresses of the licensees. And I can defer to my testifier, Whitney, to further explain the bill.
Thank you. Welcome to the committee, Commissioner Place, and just go ahead, identify yourself and state your comments, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I don't have a lot to add. I think Representative Vang kind of covered it, but I'm here to stand for any questions the committee may have.
Okay, any questions? Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question for Ms. Place. As I understand, USDA and MDA didn't quite agree on rules for this year, so you're operating under USDA rules this year. So does this new bill at all attempt to pacify USDA, or is that a whole separate issue as far as getting your set of rules approved by USDA?
Commissioner Place.
Madam Chair, Representative Anderson, we're in the process of developing a plan to start negotiations with USDA on their approval. This was actually, as we started writing the rules for the state of Minnesota, we identified that, over the past 4 years, we've been licensing processors in Minnesota, but processing wasn't explicitly included in the statute. And so we felt like we needed to add it into the statute to make our rules more comprehensive.
Any other questions? I don't see any other questions. Anyone in the audience who would like to testify in support or opposition? We have a couple of people maybe from the Hemp, Minnesota Hemp Farmers and Manufacturers Association. Do we have a few people that are coming down? So we have Matthew Kaiser and Sarah Wellington. So welcome to the committee, and if you would just state your name before you begin.
Hello, my name is Sarah Wellington, and I am the founder of the Minnesota Hemp Farmers and Manufacturers Association. We are a 501c3 charitable organization as recognized by the IRS, founded for the education and dissemination of research-based findings for the applications of industrial hemp here in Minnesota to help rebuild a very damaged economy and environment. Matthew Kaiser is on my advisory board, and he and I are very supportive of your definitions in the bill. I think that a working set of definitions in education is really important in this re-emerging agricultural commodity. This is an agricultural commodity, and we need to focus on that as we argue with the USDA in setting what we're looking at. Novel cannabinoids is one thing, and grain and fiber are another. I see Minnesota as being a leader in grain and fiber, from nanotechnology to hempcrete. We can do it here. And I think this committee is where we need to start, especially with research dollars. And I did see a moment for research dollars and access to banking. We were denied again a banking account, so that's my statement. And I'll leave that to Matthew. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mr. Kaiser, welcome to the committee, and just state your name and then begin your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Matthew Kaiser. I'm on the advisory board of the Minnesota Hemp Farmers and Manufacturers Association. Last month, Adam Bells of the Star Tribune wrote about how in 2019, 30 Minnesota farmers filed for bankruptcy, and that the forecast for 2020 is a further 9% reduction in farm income. While the report concerned corn and soy farmers, the predicament our state's hemp farmers are in is not much different. Throughout much of the nation, and especially here in the Midwest, the majority of farmers who grew hemp for its CBD content are still holding on to much of their harvest biomass. There are many reasons for this, but ultimately it's due to a bottleneck in processing capacity, combined with the hugely undefined regulatory around marketing, labeling, and testing requirements, which leaves farmers unable to figure out how to market their product. This issue of consumer safety has been of particular concern to our organization. And as a result, we implemented a consumer safety watchdog project where we've been testing random samples of CBD products off the shelves of retail locations within the Twin Cities area for heavy metals, pesticides, molds, toxins, residual solvents, as well as the CBD and THC content. The initial results we're getting back are anything but comforting. It's a poor analogy, but the farmers and manufacturers in the hemp industry right now, we're building a plane and flying it blind. The labeling laws that went into effect this year for pharmacies are a great start. However, it seems that the majority of consumers are purchasing CBD products from places other than pharmacies. These types of standards need to be applied industry-wide and are a constant request we hear from the public. Without guidance, the sale of hemp and CBD products will be stifled, and farmers in Minnesota will continue to suffer. The same issues are going on right next door in Wisconsin, where the Department of Agriculture stated on February 20th that 94% of the 2019 harvest has still not been sold or processed. We applaud the efforts by legislators to offer more clarity and guidance on these issues, and are largely supportive of the findings from the sale of certain cannabinoid product work group. But we're concerned that the continued focus on non-intoxicating cannabinoids comes at the expense of programs and incentives to help build an industry around the fiber, food, biofuels, building materials, and all the other 100+ products that can be made from the other 90% of this plant. Our concerns are based on the growth of industrial hemp processing facilities such as the hemp hardwood facility in Tennessee and hemp decortication facility in Texas. Minnesota was once one of the top producers of hemp fiber in the country, and we urge our representatives here to help our farmers regain that lead by spurring the growth and development of hemp beyond just CBD. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I don't see any questions. Thank you. Representative Vang,
Yes.
any concluding comments?
Nope, I would just want to like to thank the committee for hearing my bill and for your support, and I would like to renew my motion that House File 3706 be recommended to be referred to the Judiciary, Finance, and Civil Law Division.
All right, that motion is before us. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? The motion prevails, and the bill will be referred to Judiciary, Finance, and Civil Law. Thank you. So we are going to continue the discussion a little bit on industrial hemp. We've had some comments then by testifiers, but we have Anthony Cortilet is here again today. Last time we had some people that had questions. There were 4 members on the list at the time. It was Representative Lippert, Representative Eklund, Representative Keel, and Representative Hamilton. This was a while back, so you may or may not recall what your questions were. So I'm opening it up to everybody. We had the report that was done in the past, and we had that conversation, but I don't know if Mr. Cortilet, if you have any introductory comments or questions to spur our own questions, that would be appreciated. Anything?
Madam Chair, no, I'm just here to, it was
Okay.
2 weeks ago, so just to answer your questions.
All right, perfect. Well, we'll start, we'll just kind of go down, and Representative Lippert, maybe you'll be able to spur some additional questions, but go ahead with yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Cortilet, I do remember my question. It had to do with processing. So I believe you said that there was no processing for industrial hemp in the Midwest, or just very limited amounts of processing in Midwestern states. And I'm curious what the obstacles are to having more processing, and how we might move options for processing forward in our state.
Mr. Cortilet.
Madam Chair, Representative, no, there is processing for hemp in general in Minnesota. I think the case that Mr. Smoody was here today, and we can process grain, we can process cannabinoids. The problem is with the fiber, and I think our last testimony kind of showed or demonstrated that. The closest fiber processing we had up until a couple months ago was in Nebraska. I believe that company may have moved to Tennessee now. That brings a big burden to Minnesota farmers who are going to bale up hemp stock for fiber processing, put it on a truck or a train, and have to send it out to a company somewhere else in the U.S. As was pointed out, Minnesota had the lead in, was a leader in hemp processing, fiber processing prior to prohibition in the 1950s. Fiber processing is probably the most expensive type of processing to reestablish, because the decortication of hemp requires a lot of inputs. And so, we've thought about how do we get folks interested in coming to Minnesota and investing in some type of a processing plant. How we do that right now, I don't know. It seems we've talked with some investors, and they're looking for money. And obviously the Department of Ag doesn't have money to give out to investors right now to develop those expensive fiber processing plants. But I believe if we could start getting fiber processing located around the state, you would see more farmers switching over to growing hemp for fiber. And right now it's probably our least grown crop in the state in terms of what we license.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Lippert, anything else more?
Well, it just, as you're talking, it's occurring to me that seems like we have an opportunity, as was mentioned earlier, to be a leader in grain and fiber, but the processing is a huge obstacle, and so we should be trying to think about how we can make that possible, make that accessible for moving this forward. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Representative Eklund.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Cortilet, I retired from the paper industry, and hemp was way back in when was a component to the paper industry. So we have several paper mills in northern Minnesota that are always looking for a fiber supply. Has the conversation been talked to about that with those groups? Because some of them are both groundwood, some of them are the black liquor pressure cooker type process. But I would think if you're having a fiber issue and getting rid of fiber, that might be a way to take a look at it.
Mr. Cortilet.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative Eklund, that's a great point. And we have had conversations kind of on the periphery with some folks in the paper industry. One of the big benefits, obviously, is that hemp fiber can be mixed into the current wood pulp system that we have. But the other thing that's important is anywhere there's plantations with high-producing poplar that, you're waiting 7 to 10 years to harvest, you could have an annual crop of hemp in those same locations and be producing fiber for paper every year instead of having to wait for those stands to mature. Obviously, it becomes an agronomic issue. You have to have inputs then every year and so on and so forth, but you can also put folks that would want to farm in more of a row crop fashion up in that neck of the woods, so to speak, into more of an agronomic position to, expand their farming businesses.
Representative Eklund.
And thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for that answer. I do know that there is a potential processor that is looking up in the Birchdale area. So, I mean, there may be something happening. I don't know if you're aware of that one, but there's been some inquiries, and people are looking to do what they can do with their farmland up there. So thank you.
Thank you. Representative Keel.
I think my brain doesn't remember, but I have a question now.
Oh, perfect.
All this discussion about the fiber, how are we developing better ways of harvesting fiber? That seems to be such a challenge for my guys up in my district that and maybe it was a wet year and that's why. But and then when the fiber is baled, is it combustible like what's it called? Hay. Straw. Well, straw is too, but I have a neighbor who had a whole bunch of hay go up because it burned because of the moisture. So I'm just wondering, is it in the same type of thought?
Mr. Cortilet.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative, one of the issues in our state is we haven't had enough folks experimenting around with fiber. We've had a very limited amount of production. However, the fiber is being harvested in Canada as well as other states around us. There are challenges to new farmers coming in to retrofit equipment, but it can be done to cut and bale. It's been done here by several growers. In fact, in our first year, one of our growers actually dual cropped, where they can crop for grain, harvest the grain heads off, and then cut the plants. The remaining three foot of stock, and they baled those up and sent them down to Omaha to Bascor was the company, and they decorticated some fiber out of there. I haven't seen any issues so far in our state or neighboring states with the burning or fire aspect of it, but obviously if you dried your bales, to a certain point, that can happen with any type of material like that. But we're hoping that's one of the reasons it's kind of a chicken and egg thing. We'd like to see more growers start adapting it here in Minnesota, just so we can see what happens here with our annual precipitation, our growing conditions, and so on and so forth, to figure out how it's going to be, that industry is going to look like here in Minnesota, and what issues farmers are going to deal with. Obviously, fiber, even if you're harvesting for grain, is a challenge because the fiber in that plant wraps around everything. So you talked about bales going up in flames, but we hear a lot about combine fires if you're driving a little too fast, so it's definitely not corn and soybeans. You got to slow down a little bit. But those are the kinds of things that I think Minnesota farmers want to be able to put more acres in to learn how to deal with these issues.
Thank you. Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair Poppy. One of the testifiers earlier brought up the issue around banking. Can you speak to that and what needs to take place to overcome those challenges?
Yes.
Yeah,
Mr.
Madam
Cortilet.
Chair, Representative Hamilton. That's a great question because within the last year, I think I've spent more time with the Department of Revenue and Commerce talking about this because that's certainly something that's coming on to their radar for giving loans out. It's like any other agriculture. Farmers need loans, especially to start a new industry, as the first question today pointed out. The banks have an issue because of the specter of it also being a controlled substance if it goes above a number. And that's challenging because to put a loan out, for example, on a crop, they may want to take security interest in that crop, but they're doing the loan now, this time of the year, and then the department's got to go out and test it, in let's say July, August, and if the crop goes above 0.3, according to the rules as they stand now, that crop's worth nothing. So if the farmer went bankrupt, for example, or somehow went south on their loan, the bank would have nothing to put their security into. Now, that's just one example, but that's the kind of issues that banking are trying to figure out so that their interests are protected too. And I think it's getting figured out. I think there's younger bankers that are coming along today in small towns that are willing to take that risk because they like money, and there's money to be had in this, and there's a great opportunity. I mean, hemp is growing. So it's just an issue of working around this whole, it's legal if it's hemp, but it's a controlled substance if it goes above that number. And that's really where we're at right now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Brand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Cortilet, I don't believe that we had this conversation last time you testified there, but 1 in 10, or a little bit over than 1 in 10 people that grew hemp last year failed, and their crops were destroyed. I know that we have a lot of control over who grows, last year's background checks, now we're talking about licenses. We'll still continue to have those field tests. What can we do as an agency to provide guidance to people to limit that even more, to tighten that up a bit more? And then my second question is that average? Is that normal to have 1 in 10 farmers with failed crop, or is that a bit high?
Mr. Cortilet.
Madam Chair, Representative Brandt, that's the million-dollar question or issue. It's our biggest issue, I would say, with the USDA rules. What we've learned, our first 2 years of this program were truly industrial hemp, grain and fiber. Those varieties don't fail. They've been genetically grown to be below that 0.3 threshold. That's where the number 0.3 came from. Because those varieties were what commonly was referred to as hemp. Because of within the last 2.5 years, the marijuana industries in Colorado, California, Oregon have expanded to take advantage of the definition of hemp and say, hey, we can't operate outside of Colorado, for example, but we can go to all these hemp states now and we'll just grow non-psychoactive. And they're growing back with marijuana plants and sometimes feral varieties or hemp varieties, and those genetics are unstable. So to address your question directly, what the department's trying to do is tell growers when they get involved in this, it's a high risk to grow for any cannabinoid extraction. And unfortunately, because of the kind of gold rush that's been created with the need for cannabinoids or the demand for cannabinoids in the public sector, that's where farmers want to go. They're being told, hey, you can make $10,000 to $80,000, $1,000 an acre. If you grow for cannabinoids. That's hurting our fiber and grain industry. And so that creates, it's just a multi kind of dimensional problem here. We can't really provide any protections to a farmer when they buy their seed in the spring and they're told by some grower in Oregon, oh yeah, this is guaranteed not to exceed 0.3. There's no way to know that. And so, one of the solutions that we tried to put forth to USDA was remediation so that we could give a scale above 0.3 where we could allow either a grower to just strip the flowers and the leaves, which, by the way, the Controlled Substance Act does not consider those controlled substance and never has, or to allow them to mix it down or just to test final product. Why are we testing in the field when we know they're going to go extract cannabinoids and jack the 0.3 is going to go up to 1 to 3%? I think the problem is USDA is new to this. We've had 5 years of experience trying to build this industry. We've had 2 years with cannabinoid extraction. All of the failures are occurring with those cannabinoid extracted plants. I can't give you a national average. It's all over the place, but I can compare it to Arizona where they had 40% failure rate. And the one thing I guess I would ask of this body is if you can help us in any way, help farmers. The worst part of my job is trying to call somebody up that didn't intend to grow a controlled substance and they're at 0.7. No one is going to sell cannabis at 0.7 for anything other than a hemp use. Until you get up past the 3%, mark, realistically, you're looking at negligible THC, and we're punishing farmers for that. And until we get genetics figured out We need some way to help them. And I would say that's one of the biggest issues that farmers deal with is that insecurity, along with banking and, processing.
Representative Brand.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for those answers. One question I have is, if I'm a farmer and I'm starting out with this process, I don't really know where to start. And so oftentimes when I buy my seed, I would go to the Nicollet elevator or the Traverse elevator and talk to the people there. And if they're selling this stuff from Oregon or another state, like where Arizona had grown theirs and had such a bad fail rate, is there something that MDA or somebody else can do to kind of blacklist those growers or those seed distributors to say, no, that will not work for the requirements here in Minnesota, or to kind of give some training to the folks who sell at the elevators and say, hey, look, if you're buying these seeds for growing in your district or your counties rather, these growers or these seed producers are failing at a high rate. Is there something we can do to kind of diminish that? I mean, I can't imagine that many farmers are seeking this stuff out on purpose. I'm sure it's all accidental, but with 1 in 10 sinking money into seed, spending that time growing the product, and then all of a sudden finding out in the middle of the harvest or the middle of that process that you've got something that's going to turn into nothing, and there's no remediation from the federal level or the state level, I got to be wondering if that maybe causes some people to pause when we should be really thinking about the potential for this industry and how much we could do to benefit our local economies.
Mr. Cortilet.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative Brandt, I couldn't agree with you more. One thing, well, there's two things I want to point out about that. The last year was really our first year that we had failed anyone. Prior to that, there were no failures. And that was because of the influx in CBD growth and all of the genetics coming into the state. The good news is that we are building more of a seed industry here in Minnesota. There are a few growers that are starting to now grow. We have good associations. One of them testified earlier. Farmers are networking. They're using their associations to educate themselves. We're starting to have folks from the University of Minnesota reach out to us and get involved from education and extension standpoint, so I'm excited about that. I just think for the first couple years it was kind of looked at, well, this is just a pilot program. And a lot of people didn't take it seriously, but the farmers were. And now it's grown to a level with the 2018 Farm Bill passing over a year ago where it's nationally, accepted. And you're seeing a lot of interest in it, but now it's also exposing all the bottlenecks we have. So, the department has been so focused on just licensing and testing fields and trying to make sure that fields are compliant. That takes a lot of our time. It would be great to be able to do other things. I know there's been a couple reports that have been submitted to the legislature this year on specific to cannabinoids, but they're relative to hemp. And I think that committee, I was one of the members on both of those, but the folks pointed out that there's a lot of different regulations federally and state. There's all kinds of agencies that are involved in this and that, and they're not necessarily all talking to each other. And that's not really necessarily a criticism. That's just the way things work. But we need to break those barriers down too, because farmers get stuck in the middle of all of this, and they're lacking the information they need.
Thank you. Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just add that farming can be a risky business, and if a farmer's going to take a chance on growing a crop that grosses $80,000 an acre, he better realize that there are risks involved in that. My question to the testifier, Mr. Cortilet, we talked about acres of hemp grown. It's also being grown in greenhouse situations. I would assume very high intensive capital type thing, and I would also assume that's being grown for CBD production. Have any of those facilities had product that's been tested to be too high in THC?
Mr. Cortilet.
Madam Chair, Representative Anderson, yeah, they have. And in fact, CBD is grown outside and inside, or cannabinoid extract plants are grown outside and inside, but obviously inside's better because you're protecting any pollen drift, where outside fields that can be challenging. Yeah, I don't know what the percentage to outside fields versus indoors has been. One thing that started to happen though when we did, especially the indoor growers learned this early on, because those were some of our first failures because they were growing this time last year and they had their first harvest, is to, you don't have to necessarily let, if you think about corn, you want the best yield you can get per ear of corn, right? So you let it mature to its full growth. You might not want to do that with these hemp varieties. You need to have somebody that can test your crop weekly, potentially, to let you know where those cannabinoids or where the THC is getting to, and you can harvest early. And so the industry as a whole is kind of adopting this. Sometimes they have to harvest early so they won't destroy their crop. So for example, the numbers are somewhat misleading, or maybe not misleading, but you can look at them multiple ways. Yeah, we had 12% failure rate, but a lot of those folks that failed were growing multiple crops and they didn't fail again because they adopted that short-term growth. So I kind of straight off your question, but yes, there's just as probably many failed inside as outside.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions. So thank you for I'm sorry, Representative Lewick, sorry.
Thank you for the additional information. I guess one thing that intrigues me is we've gotten pretty good at genetics on things like corn, beans, and other things that we can literally very quickly analyze a particular seed. Are we doing any research in that area for this product? Because it seems to me that to try to stop this thing before it goes really south on you, if you know and it's predictable what that seed is going to perform at. I mean, if you get Roundup Ready and non-Roundup Ready beans mixed together, it's a disaster. I mean, who's doing research on that, if any? Because that looks like something that we need to really maybe turn the screws up on.
Mr. Cortilet.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative, that's a great question. Dr. George Weiblin, who's been in front of this committee many times at the University of Minnesota, has been doing some genetic work that we've helped to fund at the department, where we were trying to look at isolating the genetic markers that would allow us to take DNA out of seed and be able to determine what the probability would be, if not necessarily what's going to happen with that bag of seed, but at least be able to put something on the label for the grower to look at to see what the probability of it going hot or not would be. He's still working on that with his lab. We've had some other professors reach out to us on other agronomic aspects, not plant breeding so much anymore, and that's kind of where you were sort of alluding to. There is work going on nationwide. The fact that we're not the only state that has failures, this is basically ubiquitous across the U.S. hemp states. So there are some people making claims this year in advertising, like in Ag News and other like legitimate agricultural magazines and websites and stuff, which is a little different than how it was last year, where they're really putting their skin to the game by doing that. And they're claiming that our varieties will produce hardly any THC. So a lot of their research is being done privately, so it's proprietary information they're not sharing. But I think this year is going to be a big tell how the genetics jump forward, and I think we are going to see some of those cruddy varieties, for lack of a better word, start to get displaced. So it is happening.
Thank you. All right, now I see no more questions, so thank you, Mr. Cortilet. I appreciate you coming forward.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Give us the opportunity to ask those questions. So now we're going to move to House File